Hey nerds! Welcome to the React.js full course powered by React 19 and packed with real projects. We are in episode 7 and today we are learning how to actually send data from a form in React, not just console log it. By the end, you will know what the new action prop in React 19 does, how to send data using fetch, the difference between fetch and Axios, and yes, we'll build a working feedback form that hits a real API. What is action prop in React 19? In older React version, means less than 19, which was 18, 17 and all, we submitted form using onSubmit and preventDefault, which felt messy. Okay, so let me show you here. As you can see, earlier what we had to do, we have to give a onSubmit function and then we have to absorb the event and then we have to preventDefault it. Also, to check the loading state of the form, we had to create a separate state as you can see here. So I'm creating a separate state and then on the submit, we are first setting it true. Then we are validating all the fields and sending back the data to the APIs. And after that, we were doing loading to false. And based on that loading flag, we were showing loading text or we were disabling the submit button. So that's how we were working before React 19. But in React 19, we have got a new action prop. So what it is? So here inside the onSubmit, we don't need it anymore. Instead, what we can do, we can just remove it. Okay, we can do action. Okay, and whatever the action function we have to use. Okay, so here I'll just pass in action, I'll pass my handle submit. Okay, so now what we can do here, even though you can see earlier what we have to do, we have to create a separate state for whatever the input fields we have, and then on change of it, we had to store it the value on the state and then we can use it to send it to the backend. Okay, but now what we have to do in React 19, instead of creating a on change or creating a separate function or separate state, so let's remove it and let's remove this handle change. We don't need it anymore. So what we can do in React 19, so it gives this action function, it gives us a form data. Okay, so here form data, it returns a form data. So now this from form data, we can retrieve whatever the form fields value we want. So how we can get the name value here? So const name is equal to form data dot get. We have a get method on these form data object, and let's pass the name of the field. So right now we have our input name. Okay, so now it will return us the whatever the value we have in this input form. Okay, so now what this value we can use to send it to our backend API. One more thing, we don't need event prevent default in React 19 because this action handles it internally, so we don't need it anymore. Okay, and also this loading state, we don't need it. Okay, so let's remove this also. Okay, so that's it. Just you need to get the form data and send it to your backend API. Okay, and that's it. And regarding this loading, so in React 19 with action, we have got a use form data state which returns us the pending state of the form. Okay, so how we can absorb it? So here let's import use form status. Okay, so we have to import the form status from React DOM. Okay, now we can use this form status to get the pending status of the form. Okay, so let's const distract the pending from use form status, right? And then this pending, we can use it to disable the form button or to show a different text. Okay, so now let's go to console here, refresh it, and let's try to enter some value, Nerdsprite. Okay, and let's try to submit it. So now you can see, okay, let me just console it here as well, so you can see the data. Console.log name. Okay, so now let's come here and then add value, Nerdsprite. Okay, and let's try to submit it. So now you can see we are getting the name Nerdsprite. And also you have noticed it's not reloading the page. Okay, so whenever we are sending some data, means when we are trying to enter and submit the form, it's not reloading the page, even though we have not used event.preventDefault to prevent it from reloading. Why? Because in React 19 with action, it handles internally. So we don't have to worry it anymore about the doing event prevent default, or then we need to create a separate state to get a name and also to handle the loading state. So it's all done by React 19 internally. So we just have to absorb the pending state, and also from the form data we can get whatever the value of the input field from form we need. Okay, so why it's awesome? Because now we no need on onSubmit here. Instead we can use action directly. Also we no need to use event.preventDefault. It's get handled internally. Also we can automatically collect input, means this input data, with this form data object. Okay, also it works great with server components and allows easy loading and pending state. So we don't have to create a separate state for loading or pending status. We can just absorb it from use form status. Now let's connect our frontend to an actual API using fetch. So to send our data to backend, we do have multiple methods or library. Okay, but by default fetch is inbuilt, which we can use, and the other way is we can use some external libraries to hit and make the HTTP request. Okay, so now let's make it real by fetch. So fetch is basically a built-in browser function to talk to your backend, basically to make HTTP request. So we don't have to install anything here. We can just call the fetch function, which is built-in browser function. Okay, so how we can do that? So let's here you just need to write fetch. Okay, and then here you have to pass some things so that our browser know where and what to hit. Okay, so first thing is we have to send the endpoint where we want to call the API. So basically the path of backend API, and it is mandatory field. So let's we can do something like API slash feedback. Okay, something like this we can do, and we have to await the response. Okay, otherwise it will return us promise. So let's await it. Okay, and let's store our response into this response object. Okay, and obviously you can use await only within a async function. Okay, so that is the first thing about fetch, like we have to give it endpoint. Then second is we have to provide some properties within an object. Okay, and this object needs a method. Okay, so as you can see, it is showing suggestion method, like what type of method of my API is. So as you can see, I am just adding post method. Okay, now what we have to pass, we can pass some headers also within this object. So headers, like let's pass content type is application slash JSON. Okay, this we can pass in header, and then we can pass a body here. Okay, so what we want to pass in body. So if it is a post, then we have to pass something, otherwise in get we can just make it empty. Okay, so let's pass JSON. Let's stringify our value and then pass it. So JSON, within this object we want to pass name with name colon name. This we can do, means in name key property it will have the name value, all else we can just remove it. So it is also the same. Okay, so here you can see I am calling the fetch API, and I'm getting I'm giving my backend API endpoint, and also in this object we are passing method of our API call, and then header, and then body we want to pass to our API. Okay, and then it will return us some things. Okay, so it will return us response. So let's handle some response over here. So if response dot okay means we have added not okay, so means our response is not okay, means we got some error, right? So let's get that error in a variable, error text variable I've created, and here I can await the response, whatever the response I'm getting, and from here we can extract the text by response.text method. Okay, so basically it will return us the error object, whatever we are getting, error text basically. So, and then we can throw a new error here to our front end. So our front end handle it this error accordingly. So let's give it something like server error string, and then we can add here the error text whatever we are getting from the backend. Okay, then if it is everything is correct, means we have got some correct response. Okay, so left result, let's just check basically whatever the response we are getting, let's parse it and then use it. So await again, okay, response dot JSON, and let's console.log here. We can just use it whatever the result we are getting. Okay, so now here you can only call this JSON once. Okay, so basically we are storing it into the result variable so that we can use it again later where we need it. Okay, so this is how we have to make an API call using fetch. So as you can see, we no need to install anything, so it is built in, no install. And also you must parse JSON manually. So here as you can see, I am parsing JSON manually and handle error to yourself. Like there is no built-in function or anything to handle error. You have to always handle the server errors and all through your front-end code. Okay, so that is the one way using fetch. But there is also a cleaner approach by using any third-party libraries. Okay, so in IT industry, let me tell you, we are mostly using Axios. Okay, so Axios is a popular third-party library that wraps fetch and make it life easier. So Axios is also what it is doing. It is just using this fetch itself, but it is handling some things internally, so which is making our life easier. So we don't have to worry exception and all of that thing. It handles automatically by Axios. So for that, we have to first install that library. Okay, so let's come here and open on terminal and let's install npm install Axios. It is third-party library, so we have to install it. So let's wait till it's installing. Okay, so now as you can see, it has installed. So now let's use this Axios. But first, let's check if in the package JSON we can see that. So here, as you can see, I have installed Axios version 1.11. Okay, now let's come here into app.jss. Let's save it. Okay, now to use Axios, we have to import it first. Okay, so let's import Axios from Axios. Okay, so now instead of writing a fetch here, what we can do, let's do one thing. Let's comment it out first here. Okay, we can use a try catch block first. Okay, so let's try. Okay, so in try block, let's create a variable to store the response of the API. So it's response. Basically, we have to await the response. So Axios dot. Now instead here we have to pass the method in this object, right? But instead here for Axios, what we can do, we can just Axios dot get post whatever the method name we have to use, we can just use that method here. So Axios post. Okay, so it will basically use the post method, and then we can pass our API endpoint. So let me copy this from here. Okay, and we can pass the API endpoint here. And then after this, what we can do, we can pass our body, basically this one. So let's use it here. So here what we can do, we can pass our name within this name. Okay, so like this we can do, or else same, we can remove this name. Also, how we can console our value, we can console it by just response dot data. Okay, so here we don't need to parse value separately as we are doing here in fetch. It gets automatically done by Axios and is stored in data property of response. So we can just get the value like this, response dot data. Also in catch, we can directly get the error object. Okay, so error, and here then we can console or handle error whatever we want based on our requirement. So console dot, let me instead of log make it error. Okay, and then here we can just error whatever the error response dot data or error message we are getting, error dot message. Okay, so here we can just get the error like this instead of again writing if checking if response is okay and then just awaiting it to get the response text and then throwing the new error. Instead we can directly catch it within the catch function of error object. We can get the error messages. So that is the much cleaner and reusable approach instead of using fetch every time. So why people love this Axios? Because it auto converts the JSON. So as you can see, I don't need to convert it in JSON, what we have done here in fetch. Okay, so it gets converted automatically. Easy error handling. So as you can see in catch, I can handle the errors easily. Support interceptors, good for token unlocks. Okay, request timeout built in, like here after few milliseconds, the request timeout gets executed. Okay, it is great for bigger apps. Okay, so as your app grows, definitely you need to use Axios instead of using the fetch. So in large application in the industry, we are always using this Axios. Okay, so now let's check what is the difference between fetch and Axios and which should you use. Okay, so feature wise, Axios we have to install it, but for fetch we don't need any extra installation. JSON parsing in fetch it is manual and in Axios it is done automatically. Interceptors we don't have in fetch, in Axios we do have interceptors. Error handling is verbose in fetch, but in Axios it is clean. Timeouts needs abort in fetch, okay, but in Axios it is built in. Means in fetch we have to give like in after how many seconds we have to wait for API response and then we have to timeout. But in Axios it is handled automatically. Okay, it is built in. SSR friendly, fetch is SSR friendly, but Axios sometimes needs polyfills. Okay, so use fetch if you want zero dependencies, you are in server component or SSR, you want full control, then use fetch in that case, and use Axios if your app makes tons of API calls. You want cleaner code, interceptors and timeout. You love developer convenience. It's mini project time. So today what we are building? We are building a login form where we'll be taking username and password and we'll be validating it using dummy JSON APIs. So for our backend validation, what we are going to use? We are here in dummy JSON. It is fake backend APIs you can use in your application. Okay, so here we do have a auth. Okay, so here as you can see in auth, we have a login endpoint which we can use. Okay, and these are by default username password which we can use for login. Okay, so we'll be using this API to call backend and get the tokens and we'll let the user log in. Okay, so let's go to app.js again and we'll be also doing it using Axios obviously. So now let's come into form of first let's remove these things. Okay, let's remove everything from here and then also these, and also let's remove the action for now. Okay, so now first let's give it a class of login wrapper, and now we have this form. So I'll give it class name of login card. Okay, and in this form first let's add a heading of h2, okay, which will so welcome back. Okay, and let's give it a class name of title. Okay, so now in this form we need two things obviously. One is for username, means one input field for username, one input field for password. So let's create two input fields here. So input name will be username, here we'll be taking the username. Okay, and also let's add a placeholder of username and let's add a class name of login input. Okay, and let's add it as a required field. Okay, so this is one input field, and let's create another one for password. So let's name it as a password, and here in placeholder let's add password, and let's give this input as a type of password also, password. Okay, placeholder we have given, and also this is a required field. So now we have created two fields. Okay, and let's create a button here. Okay, basically a submit button, which will on click on that we'll be calling our API and submitting the form. Okay, so let's give it a class name of login button. Okay, and this is our UI ready. Now what we have learned, we have to give a action. Okay, action function basically, so that we can submit our form. So let's give it an action function. So here let's name it as submit login. Now let's create this function. Here it should be always a asynchronous function, right? So async function. Okay, so what is our asynchronous function here? So here I want a submit login. Okay, and here let's use the form data. Okay, so here we have created our function. Now in this function, how we can get the value of this username password, we have already saw. We can get from data dot get. Okay, so let's get these two's value. Username is equal to form data dot get, and from here we can get it from field name. So what is field name over here? Username. And let's do same for password. Password is equal to form data dot get. Let's pass the field value password here. Okay, now we have got both the values, right? So now let's call the backend API using Axios. So let's create a try catch block basically first. Okay, and also catch with error object. Okay, so let's now come inside the try. Okay, first what we want to call, the Axios API. So let's store the response first in a variable, and then let's await Axios dot post. Okay, so it is a post method, and from here we can copy the URL. So as you can see, it is post method, and from here let's copy the URL. Okay, API URL basically. So let's add a endpoint here. Okay, so we have added endpoint. This endpoint will be calling, it is from dummy JSON, and let's pass a object basically body with username and password. So let's pass username colon username and password colon password. So as you can see, my key and value state are same, so we don't need to write this. It will also work. We can remove this, so it will be much cleaner here. Okay, so let's add a comma here. So now we are sending our API request to this dummy JSON with username and password. Now it will return us the data. So okay, so to accept and store this response, we need a state, so that we can use that state to show our data or use it somewhere where we need it. So let's create a state. Let's name it response and set response. Okay, by default it will be null, use state null. Okay, and let's store this response into our set response. So set response, whatever the response we are getting from backend, we are storing into our response state. Okay, so response dot data, it will just return. Okay, so we have now stored our response data to our response state. Now let's come into catch here. If we do have some error, then also we want to store it in our response. So let's store that set response. Here I want to store an error object. Okay, so here in error dot response dot data dot message. Okay, and let's, if we don't have any message, just add a by default text of basically by default message login field. Okay, so this is our submit function is being created. Okay, so we have called it in from action, right? Now let's use the pending status also, so that we can show the text here based on that status. So how we can get that pending status? From use from status. Okay, so let's distract pending from use from status. Okay, and let's use that here to disable the button until the API call is successful, and also to show the text, different text basically based on this status. So here within curly brackets, let's add pending, and if it is true, then let's show logging in, and if it is false, let's show login. Okay, so this is our button created now, and after we get some response, let's show that in our UI as well. So here, after the form is closed, let's check first if we do have something in response, then we want to render it only. So if response means if in response status, in this state we do have something, then only we need to render it. So let's create an end. Okay, and let's return here whatever we want to render if we do have response. So let's create a div first. Here let's give it a class name of something API hyphen response. Okay, so now response can have two things. One, if it here also we are setting the error and also the data, means in response status we can either have response data or we can have the error object. Okay, so let's, based on that, let's show it in the UI. So here let's check two things. So first, in curly brackets, let's check if we have error in the response. So if response object means here we are setting error, right? So if we do have something in error, if it is true, okay, so we are using the ternary operator, okay, which we have learned in last episode. Okay, so if it is true, then we want to show a p tag where I'll show the response dot error. So response dot whatever the error object I'm getting, so response dot error. Now so let's add some class name here, class name of error message. Okay, and we have to pass the else condition also if we don't have anything response error. Okay, so what we have to learn, we have to, let's use the fragment here. Okay, as we don't want to add any extra div, so let's add a p paragraph tag basically where I'll be showing login successful. Okay, let's add a class name here, class name success message. Okay, and also let's show the login user details. So p tag within, instead of p, let's use the pre tag. Okay, so here let's stringify the JSON, stringify the response. Okay, also may pass it null and to default. Okay, so here whatever the response I'm getting, if we do have something in response, then this div will show, and within this div, if we do have a response error, then this paragraph will show, otherwise we will be showing that login is successful. So this is how we have created a function to submit login. Now let's go to our localhost here. Here, as you can see, I have username and password form with login button. Okay, so don't worry about the CSS. Okay, I have already written earlier the same CSS I'm using. Okay, so don't worry about that, it's not a big deal. So now in here you can see I have this username password which I can use. So let's copy this username, add it here. Okay, Emily's, and password is also, we can copy it and use it here. Okay, so let's remove one, I think, extra brackets. Now let's inspect it, open the network tab and hit login. So you can see our login is successful, and also what we are getting, we are getting the token, as you can see. Okay, so here we are getting token. So now let's go back here and let's console whatever we have getting in response. Okay, so let's console response is equal to response. Let's console it, go back to here, and again let's refresh the page and let's copy the credentials again. So here Okay, let's remove this quotes and then let's add password. Okay, so now let's try to submit it again. So here, as you can see in response, I am getting token, email, first name and all that. So let's instead here, what we can do, we can just in the pre tag, let's remove it. Okay, we can show response dot, what we are getting here, first name. So response dot first name, let's add a hi. Okay, so whatever the first name it will showing here. Now let's come here, let's refresh it, and now let's try to submit the form again. Okay, so here, come here and this, and let's try to add password, and now let's submit the form. So it is showing submit successfully. But so you have noticed one thing, that our loading text is not getting changed based on the pending status. So let's go into the code here and let's see what we have done wrong here. Okay, so we have used the pending form, means pending at the top label of our component, which is not correct. So basically React 19 is expecting this pending form status to be inside this form component. So how we can do that? We can create a separate file for this button, and then in that button we can use this form status. So let's do one thing here. Let's create a separate inside our component folder. Let's create a button here, submit button.jsx. okay, and let's do here in whatever the we have created. So let's do one thing. Where's our button component? So let's copy this. We'll be using this inside our submit button component. So let's create a function, export function, and then submit button. Okay, so here let's return what we have to return, whatever we have kept in our form. Okay, and also here we can get our pending status. So pending from use form status from React DOM. Okay, so, and also let's add a use client here, so it will know that it is a client component. Okay, and then we can use this. Let's remove pending from here, also from here. Okay, and let's use that button directly here like this, and let's import it. Okay, so now let's go back to our local host, come here. Okay, pending is not defined. Why? Because we have used somewhere where we have used it. Okay, so we have used here. So let's remove this console also, because we have pending in separate component. Now let's come localhost and try to submit the form again. Okay, here let's remove this, and again password enter and try to submit. So you can see it is showing login and then it is getting changed. So our login text is also getting changed because we have now kept the button and the pending within a separate component and within the form in React 19. So that is how you can use action and submit the form to backend using Axios, and also handling the pending status. Recap time, what we have learned today. So first we have learned how to use new action prop in React 19 for cleaner form submission. Then we have learned how fetch works and how to handle response and errors. Then we have learned why Axios can be more beginner friendly for API calls. Then we have learned when to choose between fetch versus Axios. Also at last, you have built a mini production style login form. Coming up next, we are stepping into the next phase of mastering React, hooks. And we'll begin with the one that confused most beginners, useEffect. In the next episode, you will explore what hooks are and why they replace class-based lifecycles, how React hooks makes your component powerful, a complete beginner-friendly dive into useEffect. If this episode helped you, please like, share and subscribe. See you in next episode, nerds.